thanks so much for being here, guys. It's really nice to see all of you. Good to see the faces behind the names. Let me know if you can't hear me on the microphone. I actually booked a conference room. I got double booked, so I'm outside in the Malaysian humidity, and I know it's nighttime there, so thank you so much for joining me. First of all, just wanted to shout out thank you to Ben, Paul, and Joshua from the Japan America Society of Dallas and Fort Worth, their team, for setting this up. Today we have two panelists. We have Samuel Lin, Senior Event Coordinator for North America Events Team at Riot Games. Hopefully he can lend his experience more on the North American market, but also we'll be focusing on the Japan market as well. We've also got Alexander Champlin, Senior Analyst at Esports at Niko Partners. So thank you both so much for joining today. We've got myself as well. I'm an entrepreneur and a filmmaker. Before COVID, I hosted a documentary in Japan about esports. We flew a whole filming crew there to spend 2 weeks with the player who was competing in tournaments. We interviewed Konami, we interviewed game houses, we interviewed team managers. And it was really interesting just to see how something that seemed to have come out of obscurity 10, 15 years ago is now so huge and explosive in Japan, where players are making 5-6 figure salaries. It's amazing growth to see happen firsthand. And it's still got this element of being underground. It's still got this element of being indie, like the way that the players would meet weekly in underground gaming cafes, and they would play their hearts out, and it means everything for them. So it was just a very different world. I just want to go to Samuel and Alexander. I'll start with Samuel and then move on to Alex. But first question is, can you describe to our audience who come from different generations, a lot of them are outsiders to gaming, how did your relationship with esports begin? And how did it evolve into eventually becoming a job? I'll start with you, Samuel, first.
Sure. So thanks again for having me here. I love doing panels in general, and especially stuff like this where we're able to educate other people about what we do and esports in general. I don't know if Alex, you share that same insight, but it's always fun for me to do stuff like this. So again, I appreciate it. To answer your question though, for me, I've always kind of grown up around video games. It's just been, a hobby that you have as a kid. You just want to play video games when you come back from school, with homework, stuff like that. And so I've always just kind of been around it. Me getting into more so esports though was in college, where we started our own esports club, just because we had video game clubs on campus. But the way that the video games were going towards, we wanted to be more than just like a for fun club. We wanted to be recognized, right? Do more than just, oh, we're just a bunch of nerds who are just like gaming. We were like a bunch of nerds who are gaming, but are really serious about this at the same time. And so trying to do stuff like that. I was blessed with the opportunity at Blizzard to do like a 1 to 2 week, basically like internship almost. And I got to talk with a bunch of people in the industry. And that definitely propelled me to get into this point where I'm like, oh, like video games, especially like pro esport level, isn't just about like gaming in general, isn't just about being a pro player. It's also, there's a lot back into it. And that's kind of what drew me towards it and wanting to kind of be involved. Yes. Yeah.
How did it sorry, I'll just stay with you for a minute, Sam. How did it evolve from being, we're all guys in this call, so we can say that we grew up overnighting at our friends' houses playing Counter-Strike. How did it go from that kind of teenage community building to wanting to then take it up as a career?
I will say, I think definitely it wasn't just like an overnight decision, like, oh, I'm just gonna turn into a video game, I guess like career path, like instantly. Definitely took a little bit of time and a lot of convincing for my parents, because it's not something that your kid just comes up and walks up to you and is like, hey, I want to be a video game, like work in video games. And for me, my trajectory was either in pharmacy or in political science, so definitely nothing remotely close to what I do now, which is events. So it wasn't just like an overnight switch, but definitely through the process of like working with the club and like building the club from like the ground up and working with administration and figuring out how to like run events and put stuff together like that, it definitely sparked a lot of joy for me. Something I really wanted to do. And I guess for me being a young, inspiring 21, 22-year-old, like I could do anything when I try to do it. Yeah, just basically tried to go for it. Yeah, it definitely was just like, it made sense to me.
And while I'm with you, while I'm with you, Sam, I'll just ask one last question. I mean, can you please describe what your usual day looks like? I think a lot of people they love the events, they love coming there. That's kind of what builds their big buzz. They save the calendar date. What does your usual day look like for someone from the outside?
It's a lot of like meetings right now. We're kind of in a prep phase, but typically the schedule kind of varies. You'll either have really low times where it's just very like lulled, like nothing's changing, and then you'll have times where you're crunching for an event, and that involves a lot of back end, like working with various partners. And so for me, being like a coordinator, I have to gather different parties from all different types of backgrounds, whether it's like engineering, analytical, business development, on the ground people, producers, and try to make them kind of work together in a sense. For me and like my team, that's kind of what we do. And my focus would be mainly on the partnership side. And so making sure that the partners are okay with what they want to activate on site, and making sure that partner managers are also okay with what we're presenting to the partners, and just helping them kind of see what an event looks like. Because kind of like you mentioned, not everyone knows what an event is or knows what goes into an event. And so trying to clue them in on that and help them activate better and reach out to the fans better.
Yeah, that's a great point that you make. I mean, what is an event in esports? Is it mostly revolving around tournament dates, award ceremonies? What's the biggest event in your calendar year?
For me, it's typically like World Championships for this year. So for Riot, we have a huge game called League of Legends. We host our World Championships every year. They vary between different countries, and this year happens to be in North America. And so it kind of works out for me. Joining the team about a year ago, I get the privilege of working on that as like the big event. For us as personal projects, though, we do have a split. Essentially, it's kind of like the NFL season, where it's divided into spring and summer, though, and they all compete for this like championship at the end as well. And so it's kind of like a weekly. The best comparison is the NFL. Yeah. But make it video games.
Okay, so closest comparison is NFL, but make it video games. That's
yeah, like the
and,
game itself is completely different, but the format.
Yeah, Alex, I'd love. Oh, sorry, go on. Absolutely, and we will touch on that later on. The comparisons with traditional sports versus esports. But I'll move on to Alex just very quickly, and I'd love to move on to how you went, how you got into esports, as a kid or as a grown up, and then how that evolved into learning about it, essentially.
Thanks, Chris. So I had sort of a roundabout trajectory into the sort of the world of esports. I come from an academic background, so I did a PhD actually about esports and video game spectatorship, and I was interested in it from from the perspective of a player myself. I kind of got into it, and really the sort of the second wave as it was moving from being this kind of Korean export to a global phenomenon, kind of pushed by the rise of live streaming platforms and like the ability to kind of consume it internationally. And so I was a player, and I had a bunch of friends that were getting really into League of Legends and a lot of the kind of popular esports titles at the time. And I was really interested in how that like that kind of culture developed, and and what it meant for for gamers. So I did a dissertation that involved interviewing a lot of Twitch streamers, and then involved going to a lot of esports studios. I was in Korea, looking at esports studios there, and I was I'm based in Los Angeles. I was actually studying the the development of the Riot game studio as it kind of moved from Culver City to to LA, and the development of that space. So that was my kind of academic trajectory, and then 3 years ago I joined Niko Partners as the senior analyst of esports for Niko. We're a market research and analysis firm. We focus on on Asia specifically, and so I help lead all of our esports research into Asia. We track tournaments across Asia. We track live streaming platforms in China specifically, and it's that's sort of my day-to-day now.
Yeah, that's such a great job. And being a senior analyst at one of the biggest publishers in Asia, I mean, you must be coordinating with a lot of colleagues who are overseas. What's your day-to-day like? It must, I mean, Sam must be more focused on North American colleagues. You must be like awake at all sorts of hours dealing with your Asian partners.
Yeah, I just got off a call with someone we're doing a project with in China. I'm one of the few people based in the U.S., so my day kind of starts and ends at 7 a.m. and 10, 11 p.m. But yeah, it's fascinating, and I think as kind of a pivot, we've been really interested in the sort of the development of esports in Japan. So we study all of Asia, and Japan's a really fascinating one. It's sort of an outlier market in the world of esports, and so it's exciting that we get to talk about it here. And I think I think there's just a lot of fascinating things to say about it.
All right, great. And I mean, I'd love to know from the outset, one of the points that we want to touch on is the relationship between the Japan market and the American market. And I wanted to get both of your perceptions on how interconnected is the esports market between Asia and North America, or is it extremely fragmented and is extremely siloed between the different formats and the different games and the different game houses? Is there a lot of cultural interchange between Japan and North America through esports?
I'd say
I'll start with Sam.
Or I don't know how we're gonna go at the start here swapping. I was gonna say I think there's definitely similarities. I think the differences definitely lie within the games. But I will say there's a huge fascination that I've seen with North American fans, myself included, with just the Asian regions in general. Just because the way that the game is played, and I'm just gonna use League of Legends, just because that's what I'm very familiar with as a fan, and also that's the main game we produce. But basically the way they play the game is completely different than the way we play the game here with the tournaments and pro leagues that we run here. And so it's always cool to talk to even the players will stay up super late because obviously the time zone gap, or they would watch the VOD reviews, or they'd watch the old videos about the games that were played the day before, the night before while they were sleeping, just to learn more about what they're playing. I think that's pretty cool to see. I don't know, I'm a little unfamiliar if that's varied at the same way, if that's something that the Asian market also looks at for different regions. But I will say it's definitely cool to see from my perspective. I can watch a game that's happening in Korea live streamed, or I could watch the VOD of it and appreciate it for what it is, even though it could be slightly different. But yeah.
Looking at the market broadly, Japan's pretty unique. Historically, there really wasn't a huge kind of, when we think of esports in the kind of, modern sense, there wasn't there was certainly kind of competition around games, but, a real sort of mature esports industry is a pretty recent development in Japan. And it's developed somewhat differently than we've seen in other markets in Asia, or just, other markets across the globe. There was a kind of a tough regulatory environment that, that made it difficult to organize tournaments, and you didn't have a ton of publisher buy-in, just the sort of the legacy of console games in that market kind of being the driving force. didn't really lend itself to esports. And what we see now is, what's emerged is a really unique culture around esports. The kind of top titles that Japanese esports fans are participating in and consuming are not necessarily the same things that we're seeing as like the kind of norm across the region or even across the globe. And so things like Apex Legends and Rainbow Six Siege are the kind of like top titles in Japan, and we look at any other market and that's generally not the case. So it's a fascinating market to study, both because it's young, because it's booming, and because the things that are popular there are unique, and it has to do with the kind of environment that's fostering esports right now.
Wow, you raised a lot of very interesting points in there, Alexander. Let's historical context so that we can kind of parallel between America and Japan. Could you please paint a picture for us how the esports industry in Japan has evolved in the last 2 years? Because a lot has changed so much, not only in the development of games, but the popularity and how much it has kind of like seeped into traditional media, of like not only viewership but ad spending as well. Could you paint a picture, like was a game that changed? Was there a game changer, or was there literally a game that changed it?
There was a game changer, yeah. So in 2020, a bunch of Japanese publishers and developers got together and formed the Japanese Esports Union, the JESU. And this was on the heels of some sort of changing regulations around. A lot of it had to do with like limiting gambling. This is the way the story goes, at least. And so that kind of put an upper limit on what you could kind of offer in terms of a prize pool. But the sort of the broader story is you just didn't have a lot of local developers really involved in esports. Making esports titles or supporting. Supporting a local esports industry, and of course, Japan's, again, a kind of a console forward market, and so sort of secondarily interested in smartphones, and tertiarily, interested in PC titles, which are kind of the globally dominant platform for esports. So yeah, the Japanese Esports Union kind of created this ecosystem that supported esports competition, and early examples were a lot of fighting games, a lot of console games, and we still kind of see that in the market. And and as that's grown, and as YouTube and Twitch have kind of become popular streaming platforms, we've seen developing appetite for for more serious esports titles. But there are things that that overlap with console, and so the kind of top games have become Apex Legends and Rainbow Six, and and then other kind of serious shooters like Valorant's kind of taking off in popularity across Asia, but it's one of the leading titles in Japan as well.
Wow, so many points you raised there. Did America? Maybe I could ask you, Sam. Did the American the start of American obsession with esports, was that kind of piggybacking off Japan's meteoric rise in gaming in the 80s and 90s, or is it building its own kind of thing? Would you say that like America, the American esports industry is trying to make its own thing, or it's kind of like really just following Japan?
I think it's trying to make its own thing. That's how maybe I have a very jaded view on it, because I'm obviously in that same group of trying to make our league, for example, like its own and its own really good product that can stand basically against any other region. But I want like people from across the world to be able to look at our region and be like, hey, like their production has done this, and this. It's super good. Their events look super cool. Why don't our events look just as cool, right? And I think I will say, like, in like the Asian markets, they were definitely ahead of the American markets. Americans and I myself included, I love sports. We're very much about like basketball, football, the traditional things that like our parents would have us like play and watch. And so getting into these types of like video games, for example, are always looked down upon. And I'm glad that's slowly changing. And I very much want to emphasize slowly. It's definitely not like a very quick, like, oh yeah, like everyone is great with like having their kid play Fortnite for like 5 hours a day or something like that. But then you see those examples where kids who are playing Fortnite professionally are winning millions of dollars when they're like 16 or 17 or even younger. But yeah, I definitely, to answer your question though, I definitely don't think that we're piggybacking per se off of Japan or any of like the Asian regions. We're definitely taking inspiration from it. Like, oh, they did something cool. Why don't we try to do that same thing? But that's also the same stigma or the same thing I want other regions to have for us is like, oh, we did something cool. Hopefully they can take something from us too.
Yeah, and you never had the issues in America that Alexander, you were raising about the rise of the JSU and how the tournament prize money wasn't really trickling down to the lower level players. So because of the shortage of resources and prize money, it seemed to always go to the top 1%, but very few resources and support would be lended to up and coming players. And then you also mix that with kind of the cultural stereotype against video gamers. In Asia, the whole idea of tiger parenting, and you're a disappointment because you're not a lawyer and you're spending 5 hours in your room. With more funds kind of being able to trickle down to lower level players and like seeing the money kind of being spread around, not just to the top prize winners, but also to the up and comers. And the American, is there an American perception that gaming is not nerdy or it's not unmanly, or do those stereotypes kind of still carry on in America and in Japan?
I think that stereotype's definitely still here. I don't know if Alex had any other things to add to that, but it's definitely something that you hear a lot of, especially in college, and even still like nowadays. It's like, oh, like what do you do for a living? Oh, I work in video games. Oh, like you get this like, oh. And so I think to the right crowd, it's really cool. To the general audience, it might not be. It's just like, oh, like that's cool, right? But I guess like my way of comparing that would be like, oh, like for me, I've worked for a company that I've dreamed of working out, and that could be the same for a normal, I guess not normal, but not less nerdy, quote unquote, person. But yeah, I will say to comments on that, I think what we're doing here in America is really cool. We're trying to build from the ground up, which is slightly different. Like you were mentioning, a lot more money is getting spread out everywhere. Granted, the top person is still getting the most, but we are trying to put a lot more resources into developing it because we realize, our players aren't getting younger. We have to find a new generation, right? And so I'm glad that we're starting to get to that point, which I think is good. It's good for the sport in general.
Yeah, you, Alex, have you seen the industry's perception change in the last 10 years?
Yeah, this is one of the reasons it's really exciting to be working in in Asia specifically, and I think one of the things that that Sam alluded to is there's this and I think there is this kind of stigma around around gaming and the sort of the time that people spend doing that. Obviously we saw a lot of recent regulation coming out of China and some attempted regulation coming out of Korea to kind of limit the hours that young people spend playing games. And when we see that stuff, we at Niko Partners, we worry about what this is going to do for for player pipelines. And I think Sam kind of touched on this, is like the the demographic that that first got into esports in in the US or or globally, outside of Korea experienced this problem even earlier. StarCraft kind of boomed in the late 90s, early 2000s, and so you had a lot of people that were that were playing that game and consuming it really seriously, kind of head into their 40s, and and now some of them are in their 50s, and and I think that's good in the sense that now you have a lot of these people who understand that industry and and what the sort of the value it can generate and the engagement it can generate. Appreciating it and kind of integrating it into, the next generation of games and, and passing it on to the next generation of gamers. I think certainly that's active in Japan. To kind of answer your question, I think, what's missing in, in that kind of concern around, the nerdiness of gaming or, the kind of time suck of spending a lot of time in games is that, there is, there's a lot of good that esports does, and I think we're seeing Asia begin to recognize that pretty early in the sort of the development of its esports industry. And so in Japan, we're seeing a lot of integration between esports and public institutions. You're seeing high schools and elementary schools and colleges interested in kind of fostering a culture of esports. And we're seeing esports integrated into healthcare and businesses saying, okay, this is especially in the sort of the world of COVID, this is a way to, keep our employees engaged and keep their minds active and, kind of keep them kind of thinking in terms of teamwork and competition and, for students, of course, it dovetails with science and technology education. It's a really kind of great way to to attract students to a university, a strong esports program. And so what's developing out of all of that is a player pipeline that's identifying esports players earlier, kind of giving them places to play earlier, and creating kind of value around esports. And I think there's kind of this push and pull of, like how much should youth gaming be regulated and how much should it be, identified as, as something that's, that is valuable and is kind of, instilling leadership or instilling teamwork or competition or critical thinking or, whatever. And I think Asia's leading the charge in a lot of that broadly.
Just touching on the topic of cultural exchange, a lot of North Americans who will go to Japan to play, or is there like a system where in the twilight of your career you'll move to like America? Or I love how you've got Japanese players playing in America and being some of the best, or you've got old European footballers playing in the American League. Is there that kind of exchange between countries, or is it still like Japan versus America in terms of like tournaments and stuff?
It's definitely still happening a lot. It's kind of, I don't know if this happened for a lot of games, but it's definitely like a meme almost at this point, where it's like, oh, they come to America to like retire. I don't know, it's similar to like footballers as well. They come to America for like an easier quote unquote region. And I think that's something we're definitely working on changing. There are a lot of young, like Alex was saying, a lot of young talent that is being scouted right now, either from college, from all of our other things. Yeah, I think you do see it a lot though. I will say a lot of, I guess, like older Asian pros, like even for example, this past year, we had a really like well-known league player just transfer from China to America and play, just because it was easy.
I think to touch on that question of cultural exchange, I think there's a lot of
Alexander, seeing a lot of mixed teams.
Sorry, if I could answer that question about cultural exchange, I think that's one of the the major one of the major benefits of esports for the gaming industry broadly and for for culture, of course. And again, to take Japan as the sort of the topic here, the leading games that we're seeing in Japan are these kind of Western imports, as like games from Western developers, or and so there's a ton of cultural exchange that way. That means that these Japanese players are are not just consuming the the esports content around them, but are consuming the the game content, all of the sort of periphery content, and and then are watching American players and are watching other players from Europe. And I think that the kind of nature of video game live streaming allows people to identify really the kind of leading players across the world, and and sort of focus on them and see how they're playing. And then there's all of this kind of cultural exchange around the games themselves. And one of the obviously one of the downsides of COVID for the esports industry was everything had to move online. You lost in-person tournaments for a few years, but what we're seeing as the kind of silver lining to that cloud is that there's a lot more online tournaments taking place, and that permits a lot more kind of cultural exchange or competition between players. And we're seeing more international tournaments take place in the Asia region. We're seeing cooperation. There's a big sort of esports cooperation tournament taking place between Japan, Korea, and China. So we're seeing it become this, and one thing we haven't talked about at all, but I think is really fascinating in the sort of the world of esports as it relates to sport, is esports inclusion in multi-sport tournaments. And so it's this year esports are going to be included in the Asia Games in China. It's the largest event that's going to feature esports as a medal event. So people are going to be competing for esports for medals that'll be counted towards their country totals. And it's an OCA sponsored event, an Olympic Council of Asia event. And so, it's really significant. It's driving a lot of the investment that we're seeing in the region. All of these countries are like, we got to find our best players, we got to put them up. And so, yeah, there's a ton of cultural exchange around esports. And I think, it's really strong in Asia right now, but I would say in the next 5 years, expect to see talks about esports in the global Olympics. And I think that's 10 years ago that would have sounded insane, and probably to people listening in the US that still sounds insane, but looking at Asia, it's not so crazy. So yeah, I think that the cultural exchange is really one of the most exciting things about esports for us.
Yeah, that recognition, I remember recognized as a side event at the Southeast Games, which is like, it's trying to plant the seed. And then now, do you think that esports will ever be included in something as big as the Olympics? I know you commented on that, Sam. Do you think that the esports trajectory has the potential to official sport like cricket or running?
Definitely, I'll agree with Alex on that one, or echoing what he just said. Getting that into like the Asia Games was huge, and for me, it's kind of the main reason why I joined or wanted to join the industry in general, just because I saw the potential. Yeah, I 100% believe like within our lifetime, it's going to be in the Olympics, like a variation. I don't know how they're going to do it because there's literally so many games. But some variation of it, I would not be surprised within maybe 10, 20 years max if it getting in. It was already in conversations this past year. It just never made it through, but the talks are happening. Like it's growing. So
it's been a medal event. It's been a medal event in the two most recent Southeast Asia Games, as well as the Asia Indoor and Martial Arts Games. So two kind of solid examples of of esports as this real kind of international form of sporting competition, legitimate form of sporting competition. And so it's just I think it's just going to continue to rise.
To paint a audience, when I was in Japan, we went to the League of Legends final, packed stadium full of thousands of screaming fans, and literally it was just like two computers next to each other, and on the big screen you just like saw zoom ins onto like a guy clicking a mouse. It's just I could not have 20 years ago when I was playing Mario, that one day I would be cheering someone who would be compared to Usain Bolt, and who could be earning millions of money, millions of dollars if they win this prize. Where do you see the future of esports? Do you see it overtaking the NFL? You know, do you see the Houston team being bigger than the Rockets? I mean, Sam, I'll start with you. Where do you see the future?
I mean, based on like numbers that I've seen from, maybe my numbers have been like 2 years old now, based on something that I've given presentations on, it's esports in general has already overtaken pretty much every popular sport that you can think of. Give like the one game I'll say is League of Legends. Our World Championship being a global event, which I'll use that as a preface, had more viewers online than the Game 7 NBA Finals, the Super Bowl, and the MLB like World Series the last game for that as well combined. Like we had more viewership than all those combined, and that's just one game, right? And so you take the thousands of other games that exist that are esport related as well, just attack on their World Championships. Like we've already hit past it. It's just a matter of recognizing it here in North America and getting the, I guess, the validation here would be a more monetary validation, and that recognition. It's better for people to start realizing that this is real, and it's happening now. Yeah, it's literally happening in all of our lifetimes.
How about you, Alexander?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, so I think comparing it to, to American sporting events is kind of buries the lead a little bit. I think, this is a hugely international phenomenon, and and it's consumed really, really heavily in Asia. And so I think, it's certainly going to eclipse these things. I don't think at any point it's going to replace traditional sport. I think it has a place beside it. And I think one of the kind of driving forces, of course, is that you have a generation of people who's growing up appreciating it. And it's a generation of people who recognize the the skill involved, who recognize in the same way that that you recognize the skill in any kind of competitive game. And so and of course then you have this booming group of people who play esports games as well. And so yeah, I mean, I think it's just a matter of time before those numbers catch up. And I think one of the sort of the big thresholds for the games industry and the esports industry is is going to be kind of creating an environment that begins to kind of unify around around what esports looks like, and and kind of opens that up to to a wider pool of players, and and is kind of increasingly inclusive and involves women, and I think those are the sort of the big thresholds for esports, is building a player pipeline, growing those players up into the sort of the next the next Faker or or whoever, and making sure that that is something that you support through through schools and universities, and kind of growing representation, and making these online communities safe and engaging for for people who want to who really want to spend their time there.
I think that's a good comment in terms of low representation of women in traditional sports. How is the esports industry, and I know we're a panel of all men, really biased, but how is it trying to encourage more inclusion by other minorities, by other parties? Well, and specifically talking about, would you think it's something that's in the makeup of the game, like sports in general?
So, yeah, I mean, I think like, one of the sort of, again, one of the reasons Asia is fascinating is we really see, mobile esports as this thing that doesn't get talked about very much in the West and the US. One of my first projects at Niko Partners actually was writing a white paper about the sort of the growing significance of mobile esports in Asia. And I remember being on Reddit and somebody was like, mobile or esports, pick one, you don't get both. And I was like, that is such a such a regionally specific opinion, because the rest of the world doesn't feel that way and is consuming the majority of their esports content on their phones, and a lot of their esports titles are on their phones, and so I think that's one place where we're seeing the sort of gender divide in gaming begin to shrink. We look at mobile gamers in Southeast Asia, and there's almost complete gender parity, and that doesn't that doesn't necessarily translate to the world of esports. But I think that's when we talk about player pipelines, that's the sort of the first step, is to get women involved in playing these games and sort of feeling like they can be part of these communities. And then the next step is is creating is creating places where they can compete, and we're seeing a lot of that come out of Asia as well. So women's specific esports leagues, women's teams, and and also one of the nice things about esports is that it's you're competing with a mouse and a keyboard or on a gamepad, and so the sort of the barriers to gender equality are more institutional than physical. And so there have been some really notable, phenomenal female players in the world of esports broadly, and so I think it's a matter of time. It's very exciting.
Perhaps on that note, I think we're at the time where we could say that this call can end. And well, I just wanted to acknowledge Sam and Alexander, and both of you, for taking the time out just to be with us here and to lend your expertise. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I actually learned a lot from it. So I just want to say thank you. Yeah, thank you to Sam and thank you to Alexander.
Thank you for having us. I think it's always a good time to just do panels like this and just chat from our busy schedules. I'm sure, Alex, you have a crazy schedule as well. But these things are always good. Kind of like we've been talking about, they help people who maybe aren't as familiar with this kind of just understand where we're coming from, why this exists, and it's just good to know.
Yeah, this was really fun. So thank you for organizing, thanks for moderating, and Sam, thanks for being a co-panelist. This was fantastic.